Now, I saw a tweet from Isaac Canupsi who was basically saying, always read contracts properly. And this is something that I think a lot of people make mistakes of and get into contracts. Contracts are very complicated things. And obviously, we are not legal experts, just to kind of give a disclaimer. But there's a few things that we have picked up over the many years of going through contracts. And we'll share some stories of some of the more out there contracts that we've had. But we're going to give three main things to look out for. Now, obviously, there's a long list of things to look out for, and please do read contracts and get some proper advice. But we're going to tell you three things that we always look out for immediately when we see a contract. So,
Yeah.
firstly, it's the word that I actually hate with a passion, and it's something that really, really works me up, and that is the term exclusivity. Exclusivity essentially means that if you sign up to this contract for the period that you agree, you cannot work with or sometimes even cover a competitor brand. Now, doing what we do, myself and E, we cover tech products. So, we cover smartphones, we cover loads of things. Exclusivity is a very tricky thing because that means we could potentially not be able to make videos. Say, for instance, I have an exclusivity deal with a smartphone maker. I can't cover another smartphone for a particular amount of time. That doesn't make sense for me. So a lot of the times I will not accept exclusivity. Well, pretty much always.
Oh, yeah.
However, it can be important. It can be somewhat important because a brand, essentially the reason why they'll put exclusivity in there is because, say for instance, you're working with Ford and you post something with Ford, and then the day after you post something with, I don't know, BMW, right? And then that can be, obviously it can come across bad for the brand. So understandably they might want some exclusivity. I think the key thing to remember, which we look at, is it needs to be reasonable. The
Yeah,
exclusivity
it
period
definitely
needs to be reasonable.
it definitely needs to be reasonable. I think the other thing too is exclusivity covers two dimensions. So, like Saf said, there's the dimension of, hey, if I'm working with a smartphone manufacturer, let's just say, let's call Motorola, right? And it means that, within that time period, and let's call the time period 2 weeks, I cannot cover Samsung, LG, Apple, you name it. But here's the other part of exclusivity that some brands do that is really tricky. They say you cannot work with a competitor, but it also means a competitor in all categories. So, for instance, and I'm not saying Samsung has done it, so don't get me wrong, but let's say Samsung says exclusivity on the smartphone because you're doing a deal for, say, the Galaxy S21. And you're like, okay, cool, fine. I'm not going to cover another smartphone for 2 weeks. I'm fine with that. But then a laptop manufacturer like HP says, hey, cool, yeah, want to do a deal with
Yeah.
you next week. And you're like, cool. And then you read the contract properly from Samsung. It says you cannot work with competitors across the board. So
Yeah.
Samsung also makes laptops as well, which means
And
now
this is
you're
where you
locked
can,
up from that HP
yeah.
deal.
So I think getting specifics of the exclusivity, because as I said, sometimes it can be reasonable. Generally, we do not accept exclusivity as standard, just because it's something that can be very, very tricky based on what we do. But if there is something that's reasonable, say for example, okay, for a week, if you're working with a case manufacturer, you're not going to show another case. If you're working with a particular
Yeah.
makeup brand or something. But I think the other thing is it's also how big is this deal. If it's a one-off deal, then I would definitely not accept exclusivity for a long period of time. Couple of weeks, fair enough. But if there's a brand deal that comes along and you're really excited about this brand deal, but they say, which I have had in the past, somebody says that you can't work with a competitor for a whole year, and it's just like, sorry, no, because now you've basically, for one project, you have closed the doors for me for many others that might come down the line. Now, fair enough,
Yeah.
if it's a recurring project, so maybe it's a 12-month deal where you will be getting, maybe a sponsored video or a sponsored post every couple of weeks, every month or so. Then that's kind of different. Then okay, maybe you can be a bit more flexible. You can be like, all right, I can do a year
Yeah.
exclusivity because we've got this ongoing deal. But I think that's one thing that we definitely look out for in contracts straight away, and it's something that I would recommend because we've heard of stories of people not being able to work with potentially better, more fit brands because they're kind of stuck with this clause in the contract.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think the other thing too is you move from exclusivity is the term ownership. Control F is your best friend. for searching for these things. And that always pertains to the brand or the brand's agency owning your content after it is made. And that is just a no, like just a no.
Yeah.
There's almost no, there's almost no
He
way
just
that
jumps
is going
in.
to be.
He just jumps in
Yeah,
as soon as he sees that. Boom! Stop.
no.
You shall not
The only
pass.
way the only way that is accepted is if you're creating content for the brand to use on their own channel, and then that is fine because now all you are is a creator that is basically making a product for them. But if it's going to live on your channels, whether it's your Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, whatever those channels are, I just say no, like flat out.
So there's a few aspects here. So when it comes to ownership of content, right? Now, if they own the content that's sitting on your channel, now say if it's a dedicated post on Instagram, maybe it's a dedicated video on YouTube, that's something that I think is negotiable to a certain extent because, you know, maybe the campaign finishes and they're like, okay, is it all right if you take the video down? And you're like, okay, fine, I'll take it down, right? That's something that you can negotiate, right? If it's an integration, there's zero negotiation there because your video, they only own that part of a video. Now, if anybody knows how YouTube works, unfortunately, you cannot edit videos once they're uploaded. And there is a YouTube editor tool, which is absolute trash. It does not work. I've tried it before many times. It just does not do its job properly. So if you have an integration and, you know, maybe 3 weeks down the line, they decide they've changed their messaging for whatever reason and they're like, oh, actually, yeah, can you take that video down? And that video is like on 1 million views. And you're like, no, I'm not going to take it down because it's still getting views. It's getting lots of eyes on my channel. Yours was only the integration. Now, if you've signed that they, you know, have that right to do that, then you have no choice and you would have to take that, you know, video down or, you know, it could get legal. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect as well is of them using your content for advertising, for marketing, right? Now, one of the things here is it might seem, and you know, for me before it used to seem like, oh, awesome, they want to use my video, I'm going to get more views. And a lot of the times, you know, a lot of brands will be cheeky and try to come in and try to pitch it to you that way, that, oh, hey, we're going to get so many more people to watch your content. And you know, like he just told me, he's like, nah, that's baloney. Like, no. That is all. They're going to be making a lot of money from your content that you've produced. So that needs to be, if that's the case and they want that, that's absolutely fine. Don't get me wrong. But that needs to be an additional fee on the content that you are creating because now they are going to be getting much more use out of it. And if you knew how much a lot of brands actually spend in terms of pushing these ads, whether that be through online or especially TV ads, I mean, the amount of money that they have to push in to actually get those out.
I mean, as a Super Bowl ad is an average $1.5 million.
Exactly. I mean, now I'm not saying, I mean, your video is going to end up on Super Bowl or something like that.
I know.
But generally, they will be spending a lot to promote that content. Now, if they can spend a lot to promote that content, then why can they not pay you the fee, the licensing fee for usage of that content? And that's something that's very important. So look out for that in contracts as well. If they do want to use it, it's absolutely fine. But also specify a term, right? You don't want to give them the rights to use something for eternity because,
Forever.
for instance, if you then go and use, let me just give an example. Say, for example, you're working with a particular makeup brand, right? And then, 3 years down the line, you start you become super famous, you're now a celebrity, and you launch your own makeup brand, right? And they start pushing ads from 3 years ago because you were featured in theirs. That's going to be a conflict of interest. So you need to specify a term as well. So you need to be like, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, whatever it is, specify that, where it's going to be. Is it going to be online? Is it going to be, on television, etc.? Also have a look at these things. Now, the last one that we're going to be talking about, the last thing to look out for, I think is, this is something that really works me up. And we'll also finish off with some crazy contracts that we've had in the past. Well, crazy terms and contracts.
Yeah.
We're not going to specify any specific details of who it was from, etc. But we'll go into that and some really funny things which you guys will be shocked about. But this is something that, thankfully I've not had to deal with myself. But you were mentioning.
I've dealt with this quite a bit. It's basically, it's not stated in the contract, and it's something you have to find in between the lines. But it's basically right to first refusal. And this is not really from brands, it's from their agencies. So what I've noticed over the years is an agency who works with a brand will, first of all, they try and get your license, your video or your content for free, without paying licensing. So that's which we talked about. But there's also something that they do. They will put in a clause stating that, you cannot work with this brand or sometimes with any other brand without getting the right of first refusal from the agency for a set period of time. Usually it's about a year. So, example, for instance, say you were like a home decor, creator, and you just did a deal for a brand new Kenmore stove, right? You've done it, but then in the next 6 months, or even in the next year, Kenmore's like, oh, we've got a new model, but Kenmore doesn't use this agency anymore because whatever deal they have is done. They use a brand new agency, or they reach out to you directly. And Kenmore says, look, we love that last video. We want to do an update with a new one. We've got, we don't even have a new stove, but we've got a new fridge, we've got a new microwave, and we want to do it. You cannot do that brand deal without going back to the agencies, because basically you now have to give a cut to that agency, or at least, sorry, the agency has to get a cut from the brand. So basically, there's no way you can do that deal unless you go back to the agency you worked with last year. And sometimes you cannot do any deals at all within that field without going back to the agency. It's one of the most mind-boggling things where I'm like,
man. I mean, I've had worse. I've had worse in contracts, which we'll get to. But one of the things, it's almost like saying, so I introduced you to Kogan, right? So because he's my friend and I introduced you, every time you want to talk to Kogan, you need to come through me first.
yeah.
He's my friend, okay? No, but this is the thing. So again, we're not painting a bad picture. There's so many great agencies that I've worked with, and I love working with over and over again. And there's so many great people behind some of these agencies as well. So don't get me wrong, we're not like kind of saying all agencies or brands are evil, but there are these things that you do have to look out for, because then you're stuck. So essentially what they're trying to do is, we bought you this brand, we introduced you to this brand, so we want to make sure we have some sort of, we're gonna cling on to this for as long as possible, which is
as
very
long
unfair.
as possible. Yeah,
which is very unfair. So the other thing to remember as well with it when it comes to contracts is that you can negotiate. So you can say, I'm sorry, but I can't accept that. Everything's up for negotiation. Yeah, I mean, they might come to you with an exclusivity clause for 3 months. You could be like, actually, I can only do a month, right? And then you might meet in the middle for a month and a half, for example, right? And again, that's something that can be done. So remember, not everything, even though it is in black and white set, it is not set. It can go back and forth. You can always get advice. I hope you enjoyed that clip. If you want to hear the full podcast episode, then that will be linked down below. And if you want to see more clips like this, then be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss them. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf Speaks, and I'll see you next time.